Hello everyone. In this video I shall be talking about puffing out your cheeks when you play a brass instrument. Now the reason why I'm creating this video is that there have been a few people that have noticed that whenever I play my contrabass trombone, or in the video where I'm playing a tuba, that I sometimes puff out my cheeks. The people that have noticed that have generally proceeded to criticize me for doing so. This video is going to be a response to those people and a general explanation as to why I don't give a flying toss about puffing out one's cheeks when you play. So let me say firstly that when it comes to brass playing, there are very few absolute rules. If you were a woodwind player, for instance, one of the absolute rules that they have is that you should always clean out your instrument after each use. Some woodwind instruments can go mouldy if they're not left dry, and so saxophonists, clarinet players, bassoonists, a whole bunch of woodwind instrumentalists have an absolute rule where they have to clean their instrument out, at least if they want it to last. If you were a percussionist, one of their absolute rules is to deafen everyone around you before you before a rehearsal begins. If you're a pianist and you go to sit down, you must always flick out your tails before doing so. But for brass players, we have very few absolute rules. And puffing out your cheeks, or not puffing out your cheeks, is not one of them. Brass playing is a very personal thing. Each musician must go on a journey to find out what works best for them. That includes how you actually physically form the notes, how you hold your instrument, any warm-up routines and so forth that you do. What works well for me may not work well for other people. And that's a simple reason as to why there are so many different guides and tutors and various books that you can buy. But my advice on that subject is simple. Experiment and find out what works best for you. There are some simple guidelines like sitting up straight can help, holding your instrument in a certain way can help, holding your fingers on the valves in a certain way and so forth. But don't let anyone say you must do it this way or you must not do it that way. I encourage you all to experiment and find out what is most comfortable and what produces the best result for you. Now, whenever I play my contrabass trombone, which is this fella here, or a tuba, they both use the same size mouthpiece. And I find out, I've realized that in order to create reliable notes, particularly low notes, I have to puff my cheeks out to make those notes sound. And the reason for that is quite simple, really. When you play lower notes, more of your lips tend to vibrate. So there are a couple of videos on YouTube showing what a brass player's lips do when they are recorded in slow motion. If you play really high notes, only the center bits of your lips are actually doing the vibrating. But when you play low notes, more and more of your lips are involved. More and more of your lips vibrate to get that sound to work. This is a problem when you've got a big mouthpiece, like a tuba mouthpiece, because the surface of this mouthpiece is flat and most people's faces have a curvature. Okay, so if I was to push this mouthpiece against my face, the natural curvature of that means that there are slight gaps at the corners of my mouth. To get rid of those gaps, I either have to mash the mouthpiece against my face with about 450 psi of force, or I need to do something that brings the edges of my mouth forward, such as puffing out your cheeks. So for me, when I play a low brass instrument or an instrument that has a large mouthpiece and I puff out my cheeks, it is simply so that I can get a seal around the outside of my mouthpiece. If I'm playing a low note, most of my mouth is going to be vibrating, so the edges of my mouth need to form a strong seal against the mouthpiece. That doesn't occur naturally, at least with me, because of the curvature of my face. It perhaps might be a different story if manufacturers made mouthpieces that had a little bit of a scoop cut into them, but they don't. At least I've never seen one. So that's a little bit of an explanation behind why I do it. For high instruments, I don't need to do that. For high notes, I don't particularly need to do that. Only the middle parts of my lips are vibrating, so the seal isn't quite as important. In fact, I can play notes that are ridiculously high, and the edges of my mouth don't even have to come in contact with my mouthpiece at all. It doesn't need a seal, but for low notes, it's a different story. When it comes to playing higher pitched brass instruments for example, cornets, trumpets, various horns and so forth, I've never had the need to puff out my cheeks. But there are several people who do, and do so successfully. Dizzy Gillespie was, I think, a famous jazz trumpet player, and his cheeks, when he played, were often in a neighbouring town. His whole face expanded, and if you haven't seen any videos of Dizzy Gillespie playing, then I recommend you do. They are quite interesting, although his case may be more of a medical issue, but in his case it didn't affect his sound production. He sounded brilliant with his cheeks in the next field than what most people, in a similar way to what most people would play with their cheeks attached to their face. The only real reason I can think of to puff one's cheeks out when playing a higher brass instrument is when you're doing circular breathing. Circular breathing is a technique whereby you store air in your cheeks and you use your cheek muscles to push that air out whilst sucking air in through your nose, and that enables a continuous airstream. However, so that's my personal experience and thoughts on that. Excuse me. That's my personal experience and thoughts on this particular topic. If you ever see a trumpet player who does puff their cheeks out, or a high brass player who does puff their cheeks out, I'll be very interested, or if you are one yourself, I'll be very interested to hear from you why you do that. Whether you find it is easier to play, whether you find it's more comfortable or gives you more support. I'll be very interested to hear from you. But if you see a low brass player who puffs their cheeks out, leave them alone. There is no hard and fast rule that states that everyone who puffs their cheeks out and plays a brass instrument ought to be punished, and very much it may just be a case of the curvature of their face means in order to create that seal around the mouthpiece, their cheeks must be blown out. Okay, so anyway, hopefully a relatively short video discussing that concept. Thanks everyone for watching.